Yes, ma'am. Pleasure to meet you.
Dr. James Lindsay did his PhD in mathematics and then ended up on a number of subjects that personally I find far more interesting. It's amazing.
There you go.
Oh, thank you very much.
As he contributes a really critical perspective on what it means to be woke. Woke isn't a very precise term. Dr. Lindsay addresses that issue by coming with a very precise framework. He is very specific with what he means in this term, this ideology actually, this way of viewing the entire world, and what it means for our societies. So over to you, James.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much for having me here in New Zealand. I'm going to set a timer for your safety. I tend to go on a little bit. It's a shame I'm not speaking in Canada. I like getting introduced as foreign talent. That's going on my bio. But in Canada, all I have to do to win you over is come out here and make a joke about Justin Trudeau being the progeny of Fidel Castro, and I'm in. I don't think Jacinda came from the Castro line except ideologically. So there we go. You guys don't like Jacinda. We've got an in. I am here to talk to you about the woke ideology, or ideologies, however we want to phrase this. There are a number of ways I can address this. I think maybe it's worth, some people in Auckland wanted me to address the origin of the term as kind of a starting place. Woke is not an academic term. You might have noticed that. They don't use a lot of one-syllable words with no hyphens in it in academia anymore. They say things like a critical constructivist epistemology, which is actually the very precise definition for woke. There's a book called Critical Constructivism by Joe Kinchelow. I call it the Book of Woke. And what Joe Kinchelow explains about critical constructivist epistemology, aka woke, is that it is a worldview. It is a totalizing way of viewing the world. It is a set of lenses that you adopt to see the world differently. But the word woke itself, he doesn't use in that book. He wrote that book in 2005, and nobody would have used that word except in some very niche communities of African Americans. It's an African American slang term. It's not, in fact, an old African American slang term that was popular. It did get used starting maybe in the 1960s. I've done a little work, and some others have done a little work trying to dig into its ultimate origins, and it's murky. In the 60s, the popular term was hip. Are you hip to the racism? Are you hip to the police? Are you hip to the oppression? Are you hip to the way that they tell you one thing and do another? The word was hip, and this is the word that ultimately became woke. The first real interjection of the word woke into the popular lexicon in African American culture came from Erykah Badu, who is a R&B singer. And she wrote a song that came out in 2008 called Master Teacher. And in parentheses, the title is Master Teacher, Stay Woke. And then it started to matriculate into communities who were aware, kind of community watch communities in African American neighborhoods, who were aware or afraid or concerned or believed, lots of possibilities, that there was racism within the police, racism within the community, and that it was up to you, particularly to teach your children to stay woke, that everything's not as good as it seems. And that's really the origin of this term, which wasn't used widely until after a young man named Trayvon Martin was shot in suspicious circumstances by George Zimmerman in Sanford, Florida, which is just outside of Orlando, one evening. And the Black Lives Matter movement started as a grassroots program. Now, we don't know Black Lives Matter because it's a grassroots program. We know Black Lives Matter because it was a worldwide program run by a woman named Patrisse Cullors, who said she was a trained Marxist. And Marxism's never a grassroots movement. We know Black Lives Matter as a Marxist movement, or a neo-Marxist movement, if we want to be technical about it. And this is the story of communism. It's called co-optation. Something happens, something's going on that they can exploit and take advantage of in a community, in a country, in a city, in an environment, in a neighborhood, and they co-opt it for themselves. They twist it into a critical consciousness, as they might phrase it in modern parlance, class consciousness, maybe a century ago. And they frame everything out in terms of a Marxist analysis of why it's happening the way it's happening. So the woke movement, as far as, say, critical race theory goes, co-opted Black Lives Matter and co-opted the word woke, not to mean that you're aware that the police might not be as on the up and up as they're supposed to be, or whatever else, whatever other hangovers of racism may or may not have been present. It didn't mean that any longer once they got co-opted. What instead it meant at that point was that there is an intrinsic system of oppression that is created and perpetuated by white people in order to intentionally exclude people of color, and especially blacks and indigenous people, from the full fruits of society, and that every white person and every black person and every indigenous person who doesn't say the right things and think the right things is complicit in upholding this system of injustice, a systemic racism. And it means understanding as a worldview, as a set of lenses, that everything in your life is colored by systemic racism, including your understanding of yourself. The fancy academic literature calls this structural determinism. The structure of society itself determines who you are and how you will see the world. And you can wake up to that fact and have a critical consciousness, a critical race consciousness maybe, or you can stay asleep to that fact and you can have a false consciousness, and therefore your opinion doesn't matter. So maybe here on your islands, you're the wrong kind of Maori if you speak up the wrong way. It doesn't actually matter who you are or what you look like. Let me tell you about Larry Elder. I know you guys follow American politics shockingly well. I was warned. You can't trick them with American politics, which is not true even in Canada, which touches our country. Larry Elder is an African American, a black man from East LA, which is not a good neighborhood. If anybody had the so-called authentic black experience growing up, it was Larry Elder. But Larry Elder is a conservative. So when they attempted and failed to recall Governor Gavin Newsom, boo, I would love to start calling him Gavin Adern. When they tried to recall him, Larry Elder ran for governor, and the Los Angeles Times ran an article with the headline, "Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy." You know how they knew that? Because they're woke. They understand that there's a system of power, and it doesn't actually matter what his lived experience growing up was, and it doesn't actually matter what his skin color is, and it doesn't actually matter what his experiences with racism or white people or anything else were. All that matters is what Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said. We don't need any more black faces who don't want to be black voices. And we don't want any more brown faces who don't want to be brown voices. So let me disabuse you immediately of the concept that woke attitudes toward race have anything to do with race. They don't have the first thing to do with race. Race is called an excuse. It's a pretext. All that matters is whether or not you have the right ideology coming out of your mouth. Now, where did this come from? Oh, the DEI office, right? Or something. The universities. We can blame a lot of things. Well, it turns out that this came actually from the Soviet Union. The program in Russian that we call diversity was called Raznobratsiya. Do you know what Raznobratsiya means in Russian? It means diversity. It literally means diversity. And what Lenin explained, that's Vladimir Lenin, not John. What Lenin explained about diversity is that what you should seek to achieve is diversity informed to arrive at unity in content. In other words, you look different and you think the same. So when Larry Elder looks different to the predominantly white America, I suppose, having lived there, I don't know that that's really the thing, looked different, and he spoke not with the unity of form of the critical race ideology, of the woke ideology. He wasn't really black. He was the black face of white supremacy. And here, I know we have some here in the room, we have the wrong kind of Maori when they open their mouths and speak up against something like trans ideology, which is kind of shocking. It's really weird. It's like Dave Chappelle, also black. If you don't know who Dave Chappelle is, he's a comedian. I don't know if it's politically more correct to call him African American. I don't know what I'm supposed to call people anymore. We got lost in the last 5 years. Dave Chappelle made jokes about trans people in one of his specials. Everybody probably saw it. Something about the alphabet people, got in a lot of trouble. And the article that came out was that Dave Chappelle made jokes about transgender ideology from his position of white privilege. Now, you remember that Dave Chappelle back in the day did a comedy skit where he was a blind black man who was a white supremacist and a Klan member because he didn't know he was black, right? They made it real. And when they were asked, the authors of this article were asked, how does Dave Chappelle have white privilege? They said, because he's rich. How messed up are these people? This is the woke ideology. This is your brain on drugs, right? This is your brain on woke ideology. You guys fry eggs down here and put them on burgers with beetroots, I know. You guys put the beetroots on a burger. Are you okay in the southern hemisphere? Blink twice if you need to come north. This is what woke ideology is all about. But this program that the Soviets were running, Raznobratsia was embedded in a bigger program called Korenizatsiya, and where you're now officially out of things I know how to say in Russian except cheers, which is na zdrovye. I say that one with an accent because I learned it in practice. I'm an honorary Russian. We won't talk about that night. There's a lot of vodka. Okay, I got 4 words in Russian. Korenizatsiya, koreni means putting down, it means roots. Korenizatsiya means the process of putting roots in. So what the Russians did, what the Soviets did, what Stalin did, the book was called Marxism and the National Question. And what Stalin was trying to answer was, how do we figure out how to take not just Russians and make them into Soviets, but Georgians, Estonians, Latvians, Ukrainians, Caucasians, Tatars, who are Muslims. How do we make them Soviets? And he comes up with this program where he says we go to the ethnic minorities and we tell them the following. See if this sounds familiar for New Zealand. We tell them that there's a great power in Russia that's chauvinistic and is trying to make you all Russian. The goal is that great Russian chauvinism is imposing upon you. But we, the socialists, believe in your self-determination. Your schools should be in your native languages. Everything you do in your town councils and everything else should be in your native languages. Your leaders locally in Ukraine, let's say, should be Ukrainian. And here's the thing. You're not Russian. The Russians, they're feudalists. We are communists. We believe in socialism. And look at your traditions. They're much more socialist than the feudal Russians. You're already halfway to socialism. So we'll help you. We'll give you positions when you understand where we're coming from and express true Ukrainian identity. And we'll make you the leaders of your people. We'll help you bring your natural socialism out and differentiate you from the Russians who are imposing upon you. And when you have your self-determination, we'll set up a Congress in Moscow, and we'll bring some of you. And anybody who, we'll give you things to, suggest in the Congress, and anybody who criticizes you, we'll call them a bigot. We'll tell them they're engaging in great Russian chauvinism. You're not letting the Georgian or the Ukrainian or whoever it happens to be speak. Does this sound familiar? We call this program DEI. We call this program DEI. I am absolutely certain after 3 days in your country that your Maori people have been used with this program. They've been agitated with this program to tear apart your country, the same way the black people in our country were used with this program to tear apart our country, the same way that the gay people in both of our countries have been used to tear apart their countries. The leading publication that the progressives have for gay issues in the United States is called LGBTQ Nation. Stalin wrote a book called Marxism, and the national question will allow you to self-determine, will allow you to live your culture, live your truth. It's just an update of the language. And so we've been enacting a Soviet program, a literal Soviet program that was imported not just from Soviet Union into the West in the last 10 to 20 years, but was imported from Soviet Union into China in the 1940s. Mao Zedong used it. In 1950, some odd, 3 or 4, he wrote a short commanding order for the Chinese Communist Party. Combat Han chauvinism. 55 ethnic minorities in China. One Han race as the 56th ethnicity. Obviously largest, 91% or something of the population. Don't check my stat. I promise you, I looked them up over some cider at the pub. Something like 91%, very high percentage, 55 ethnic minority races, and we're going to Hanify the whole country. But no, the communists don't want to make you Han. They want to let you be who you are, self-determination. In fact, Mao wrote explicitly that the program he brought in to deal with the ethnic minorities in China was the one that was developed by Stalin to deal with the national question in Soviet Union, Korenizatsiya. This is the program that we've been calling DEI. Literally, the I part, inclusion, what I just described to you as Korenizatsiya, is how inclusion works. And you'll notice it's pretty exclusive. It's exclusive of everybody who doesn't agree with the ideology. It's inclusive of everybody who agrees with the ideology. Notice I didn't say anything about race again, or sexuality. We know it's true in the United States, it's a big scandal. They just did this big analysis. I don't know if it was Doge. They did this big analysis and found out that 74% or 76, one of those, percent of the DEI coordinators are white. That laugh came from the wrong kind of Maori. Give her a hand. That's right. It's a fraud, you all. It is, can we use an ethnic identity as a tool to install socialist political officers in all of our institutions, in our government, and get the poor, guilt-ridden white people to bend over to it? And it doesn't have to be white people. It was the Great Russians and it was the Han Chinese. It's called great power chauvinism. So this is what the woke programming that we've seen actually is, where it actually comes from. But where does that come from? Where did Lenin and, well, actually Stalin wrote this, but where did they get these ideas? Well, what's the book Stalin wrote in 1913? Before the Soviet Union was even formed, he wrote this book. It's the only book he ever wrote. It's his only work of theory. It's very short. Not a big writer. Kind of a doer, you might say. It was called Marxism and the National Question. Marxism, blah, blah, blah. Marxism. This is the update of Marxism to attack 21st century Western societies that have upward economic mobility and generally imperfect but existing racial harmonies. How do you get in and break them apart? In the 1960s, the neo-Marxists, the critical theorists, who were calling for the awakening of a critical consciousness, awakening, woke, critical consciousness, woke. These guys said, who are these guys? Do they have names? Herbert Marcuse, the leading neo-Marxist. Max Horkheimer, the creator of the critical theory, said Marx believed that capitalism would immiserate the worker, but it doesn't. It allows him to build a better life. Marcuse said advanced capitalism delivers the goods. It allows people not just to build a life, but a better life that is really better. But it's not the ideal life. So it blinds them to the fact of what they could awaken to, the woke part, of the ideal society that's just on the other side of getting rid of all of what we would call now the problematics. Horkheimer said, the nature of the critical theory is such that in our societies, they're so immersed in the capitalist ideology that we simply cannot even conceive of the ideal society on the terms of the existing society, but what we can do is criticize those aspects of the existing society that we wish to change. That's the critical theory. Herbert Marcuse said it allows us to criticize those aspects of the existing society that we wish to change so that the ideal society, which is contained within it, can grow. So you're going to cut away all the bad parts, the racism, the sexism, the classism, the whatever, and what you're left with is a seed of an ideal society, a utopian society, a communist society that will then be able to grow by cutting away everything bad. Does that sound like what you've experienced under woke? Sky is racist, the water is racist, going on a boat is racist, going fishing is racist, eating food is racist, that food particularly is racist. Being the wrong kind of anything is, you get the picture. Everything is racist. Complain, 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 complain. Call everything you want to control racist until you control it was the definition for critical race theory I gave on the first page of my book, Race Marxism. Call everything you want to control racist until you control it. So what woke is, though, is this awakening to this Marxist belief about how difference in society works. And that belief of the Marxists is that there is an oppressor group and an oppressed group that is oppressed by the oppressor. And I say it that redundant way on purpose because they believe that oppression must be seen as a dynamic with two integral players, an oppressor and an oppressed. Marx, on the first page of chapter 1 of the Communist Manifesto, says this defines the movement of history itself. Human history is the history of the contention between conflicting or antagonistic classes. Bourgeoisie versus proletariat, slave master versus slave. And he says, in a word, that conflict is oppressor versus oppressed. So woke very precisely means believing that the intrinsic nature of society is an oppression dynamic mediated through power. And then you warp your critical constructivist epistemology. Epistemology means theory of knowing. You warp the way that you interact with all information, like you've put on a pair of goggles that let you see the world like this, very clear. You put on your pair of goggles that allow you to see the ramifications of oppressive power in everything. And the magic sauce for Marx is that being oppressed causes suffering. Suffering brings enlightenment. That enlightenment delivers right to rule. And that's woke. You have suffered an indignity. It's structural, it's systemic, it's the nature of your entire social reality because it's corrupted in one way or another through the existence of private property of some kind or whatever. And that indignity awakens you to the fact that there's the possibility of a completely different reality with a completely different kind of people if we could just transform everybody to be that. He said communism is the positive transcendence of private property as human self-estrangement and thus a complete return of man to his human, which is to say his social nature. Positive transcendence of private property as human self-estrangement. You're going to transform people's relation. I know, it's like, what the heck? You're going to completely transform human beings' beliefs. That was a direct quote, by the way, so thank you for my ability to remember things. You're going to transform who human beings are to be people who return to their true human nature, which is a socialist. That's the essence of communism. And what's causing them not to be a socialist is their own estrangement from themselves, human self-estrangement, by virtue of owning private property. Here's why. It's very simple. This is my cell phone. You cannot have it. That's it. It's my private property. You cannot have it. Which means I can exclude you from something that I've laid a claim to ownership to. Which, yeah, the government is in there. Let me talk to my FBI agent real quick. His name's Brian Otten, by the way. You thought that was a joke. I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, the government is always in your front. No, the fundamental right to exclude people from private property means this is mine, that is yours, I can keep you from it, you can keep me from yours, therefore we are different people. We are not one collective, we are individuals. That's what it boils down to at the bottom. So woke means believing, in essence, because of the facts of oppression defining human existence, that we are collectivists. That only through collective action and collectively seizing and applying power can we achieve a functional and proper society. This is what woke means. There is no you get to be who you are, because if you use your own intellect, you use your own brain, and you belong to a particular community like the Maori, and you say the wrong thing, you're the wrong kind of Maori. You're the blackface of white supremacy. You, like Pete Buttigieg, are homosexual but not gay because you don't speak with a gay voice and you wear a suit to work, so you're not representing properly. I guess the Secretary of Transportation under Joe Biden was supposed to show up in drag wear, and you think that's a joke, except you had that nuclear guy, Sam Brinton, who was stealing women's clothes from the airport and going to work in them. That was actually happening. This is what woke is about. It's not about race, it's not about sex, it's not about sexuality. It's about believing that there's an intrinsic dynamic of oppression and that the oppressed have an enlightened status by the suffering and the unjust system that they live in that grants them the right to rule, and thus they covet power. It is a covetous relationship to power in order to enforce their will. Now we, on the other hand, in Western societies, and I get bragging rights as an American on this one, I think, not that I did it, I wasn't there in 1776. And we borrowed it from John Locke and Thomas Reed. We didn't invent it totally whole cloth. But we in the West believe that no, each of us is an individual with our own mind. If we're religious, we believe we were created in imago Dei, in the image of God, that we each have inherent dignity, that we are also, as men, not God, and therefore don't know what we deprive another person of when we impose upon them with our will dominating theirs. It is an utter rejection of the desire for power and a replacement of power with service, because it's all based on one single premise, that we are not God, therefore we don't know what we don't know. That's it. And it's a complete and fundamental rejection of all of the woke ideology that says, I'm going to force you to liberate your fellow man from oppression because that's good. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. If you read the Jewish scripture, it's very clear. There's the law. God could force you to follow the law. God doesn't. Instead, he says, be righteous. And if you want to be righteous, follow the law. You have to choose to follow the law by yourself as an individual, maybe with the help of your community, which it does encourage. And in Christianity, we have the idea of grace. Your church can't save you. You have to decide for yourself whether or not to accept or reject the offer of grace offered to you by God, which you're said not to deserve. As an individual. It's a complete rejection of the fact that the collective of human beings can say you have to act this way in order to be good and to liberate mankind from his suffering. Complete rejection of that. Now, woke doesn't have to be limited, and this is where we get fun and controversial into my recent stuff. Woke doesn't have to be limited to this leftist Marxist model. Woke is this relationship to oppression. It's belief that there's a hierarchy of oppression in society, and it is the duty of the oppressed to band together to overthrow that hierarchy of oppression in order to liberate man from the oppressive dynamic. But that raises the question of what do you do with oppression? Because let me tell you, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings or make you mad or anything. What Jacinda Ardern did to this country was oppressive. It was oppressive. What Joe Biden did to my country was oppressive. What Justin Trudeau did to Canada was oppressive, and Mark Carney will be worse. What Keir Starmer's doing in Britain is oppressive. This is absolutely true, but you have two paths to deal with it. One is that you can say that you reject oppression, and the other is to say, since we're in Middle Earth, no, I think I'll keep the ring and use it. In other words, you can turn fascist. Fascism is the reaction to Marxism that says everything the Marxists said is right about the nature of oppression, the nature of history, except one part. Everything in our society was going better until the Marxists came and said, let's get rid of the oppression, so let's keep it. Let's not lean out of oppression, but lean into oppression. Let's not lean into what Marcuse called liberating tolerance, but let's emphasize what he criticized as repressive tolerance. Society was better when white people told people what to do, is a fascist, ethno-nationalist idea. The oppression held us together is the mistake the Nazis made. It was the mistake that Mussolini and the fascists in Italy made. It was that we have this powerful ability to stand together and see ourselves as a collective in the nation. Maybe as Germans, maybe as Italians, or maybe by some other definition. Marxism and the national question fulfilled. but rebelliously instead of manipulatively. And this is woke right. So it's people who espouse right-wing views and attitudes. What are those? Traditionalism, according to Edmund Burke. This isn't an insult to traditionalism. Tradition is good. Tradition is valuable. Tradition should be recognized and honored. These are all good things. But it is to take traditionalism and use it as a definition for a people in a place who held it together by excluding that which contaminated that nation and making sure it's not part, so that that collective, fascism comes from the Italian word fascis, which means bundle, which means technically bundled into the state. One state operating as God in which all the people are put together in power. Mussolini said that in fascism, in the fascist state, you derive your entire sense of being and existence from the state, and that it is a spiritual orientation. It's a religion. Just like Marxism is a religion of destroying everything, fascism is a religion of trying to control everything. And this is what we should call woke right. Now here's the problem. Woke right is an oxymoron. You have woke, that's Marxism, that's left. I guess it's this way for you. And you have right, which is right. How do we resolve this paradox? Well, one way you can do is the mathematician in me wants to do, you can say you generalize, you go up a level, you say this is what woke is and this is why it applies, but slightly differently, upside down, one way and the other. Or you can approach this a slightly different way. You can say maybe they're not actually woke, or maybe they're not actually on the right. Maybe one of those two terms is wrong. Fascism is inherently a progressive movement located on the left, and I call them the right hand of the left. And the danger that we face in the United States, which will come to Kiwi Island 2 to 3 years later, because that's how this works, is that if I used to box, or kickbox actually, if you want to set somebody up, you throw your left, you get them to react, they slap it down, whatever they do, and you get them used to that left coming, you move and you throw the left, and you get them used to that left, and you get them used to that left, and then you pretend to throw the left, they react, and whack, you get them with the right. So if you're only watching what the left is doing, you're getting knocked out with the right. That is what I think the risk for the United States is. This is why all of my research in the past few months has been to research the errors, in my opinion, that the Nazis made, to research what young people in Germany in 1930, before the Nazis took power, were doing that swept them up in this, and I mean this not glibly, I'm big MAGA, Make Germany Great Again movement. Because what the Nazis did, what Hitler did, was took the Germans too far. He led them into a hyper-Germanness. He took what their already basis of love for Germany, desire to escape humiliation, and took it a step too far. And in his own words, in the second chapter of Mein Kampf, he says, I studied the work of the Marxists, learned to apply it myself, found it very effective, but used it to drive home my own fixed beliefs, which were a little bit different, which embraced oppression in the name of making Germany great, instead of trying to rid the world of oppression instead. And I'm very scared about the rapid rise online of these philosophies. I'm very scared of the pit of despair of young men under 30 who are being pulled into them very rapidly. I'm very scared of the fact that I don't think most of it's real. I think most of it is astroturfed campaigns by foreign adversaries like the CCP, Russia, Qatar, the Islamic republics, Iran, who know that they can tear Western nations apart now that we're angry, frustrated, injured, humiliated by woke and want out, and they can push us into something else that gets us to throw away our civil liberties, our individual liberties, and our entire heritage. And once the power comes in, once the authoritarian structure comes in, it's arbitrary. If they decide that they're fascist today and change their mind and they're communist tomorrow, update your social credit, guys. Goose step, do what they say. And that's the problem. That's what I think we need to fight. That's what I've come to New Zealand to come talk to you about, to provoke your thinking for the Free Speech Union. So much gratitude to you for A, coming out to hear me, B, letting me speak in this room, my gosh, and C, being such a warm and welcoming and interesting group of people. Everybody here in New Zealand has been so nice to me and so welcoming to me, and even when we disagree, it's been fantastic. So it's a true honor to your people the way that I've been treated, so thank you so much.